The deck of the carrier thrummed with the sound of work steel boots striking against metal, the rumble of forklifts, the clatter of crates stacked in a careful line. The air smelled of salt and oil, the sea pressing in on all sides, while the warship itself stood like a floating city. This was resupply day, routine and unremarkable to anyone who had done it before. Sailors barked short commands, sweat glistened under the harsh deck lights, and crates of ammunition passed from hand to hand like an assembly line built on fatigue. No one stopped to think about what they carried. Just weight, just duty, just another part of the endless rhythm that kept the carrier alive. She was there in the middle of it all, head bent, face hidden beneath the shadow of her cap. To most, she looked like one more pair of hands in a sea of uniforms, hauling weight and stepping aside. Her jacket hung loose, her boots scuffed, nothing to draw the eye except perhaps the strange precision with which she moved. Where the others stumbled with the shift of the deck, she never faltered. Where hands slipped on metal handles slick with condensation, hers held steady, as if the crates belonged to her alone. She breathed evenly, controlled, and even as the younger recruits grumbled about the weight, she carried her load without a sound. They didn't notice her, not really. To them she was background, the kind of worker whose name slips from memory the second after you hear it. She didn't laugh with the others, didn't trade jabs or sling jokes to break the monotony. She simply lifted, carried, and placed, each movement exact. The rhythm was its own kind of music, unhurried but unbroken. Those who might have paid attention dismissed it as oddity, maybe stubbornness. What no one thought was that it might be discipline, the kind burned into bone, earned through training that most of them could never imagine. Her hands told a different story. The skin was rough, calloused not just from work but from years of wear. Fingers curled with unconscious care around the crate's edge, gripping not to show strength but to ensure stability. Every step she took matched the rise and fall of the carrier, a silent synchronization that betrayed instincts honed under pressure. When the sea shifted, others braced. She adjusted before it could throw her off balance. It was the kind of awareness drilled into someone who had once depended on it to survive. The recruits working near her muttered complaints, their voices rising above the steady clang of work. They cursed the weight, cursed the sweat soaking their backs, cursed the endless repetition of labor. She remained silent. Her silence wasn't weakness, though they thought it was. To them, she seemed aloof, perhaps shy. In truth, it was something else entirely, a choice. Words could be wasted, but motion could not. She saved herself for the work, for the task, for the duty of the moment. And so she passed through the day like a shadow. Crates lifted, crates stacked, boots echoing across the deck. No one saw her except as another uniform filling a line. Yet for anyone who looked closer, who paused long enough to notice, there was something undeniable in the way she moved. It wasn't the rhythm of a deckhand. It was the rhythm of a soldier long removed from the battlefield but never free of its lessons. On the carrier's deck, among noise and fatigue, she remained unseen. But she carried herself with the weight of someone who had already been tested, who had already borne more than these crates could ever hold. She was not here for glory. She was not here to be remembered. She was here for work, and work alone. At least, that was what everyone believed. The morning had shifted into its second wind, the deck alive with the scrape of pallets and the bark of orders. Sweat-streaked faces and soaked collars, the smell of salt mixing with oil and gunpowder carried from the munitions bay. The inspection was supposed to be routine. Officers moved between lines of sailors, their eyes sharp for carelessness, an unsecured crate, a sloppy knot, a weapon left leaning against the wrong bulkhead. Most of the men stiffened as the Admiral approached, his reputation trailing before him like a storm front. He was a tall figure, his metals glinting, his step measured, his gaze cutting across the deck as if he saw everything and forgave nothing. She was crouched near her gear, adjusting the strap of her uniform bag that had dug too deep into her shoulder. The canvas was frayed, the kind of issue that should have been replaced years ago, but she carried it still, as if it were more hers than any regulation pack the supply office could offer. She tugged at the strap, and in that small moment of strain, the flap shifted open. For the briefest second, something glinted from within, bronze dulled with time, the faint sheen of a metal tucked beneath a layer of fabric. It should have gone unnoticed, lost in the chaos of work. But a couple of younger sailors nearby caught the glimpse and nudged one another. Their smirks were sharp, voices pitched just loud enough to carry. "Look at that," one whispered. "Souvenir shop special," another chuckled. "Bet she picked it up at a pawn shop downtown, old junk dressed up as heroics." Their laughter spread in thin, mocking threads. She didn't move. Her hand hovered near the flap as though she might close it, but she let it rest there, steady, calm. She had lived with whispers before, they slid off her like rain on steel. But someone else had noticed, and not with mockery. The Admiral, mid-stride, stopped, as though struck by an unseen hand. His head turned slowly, his gaze locking on the edge of that metal, its ribbon folded but unmistakable. The colors of the ribbon were unlike any the younger men recognized, strange, faded shades, no longer in circulation. To them, it was nothing, a trinket. To the Admiral, it was a mark burned into memory. His breath hitched once, so slight it might have been the wind, but his voice, when it came, was quiet and sharp, cutting the air cleaner than a shout ever could. "Where did you get that?" The words dropped like anchors. The sailors froze. Their laughter collapsed into silence, their smirks vanishing as they followed his gaze. The Admiral wasn't asking with suspicion. He was asking with something else, an urgency, a weight, almost reverence. He took a single step forward, eyes never leaving the half-hidden bronze. The deck seemed to hold its breath. Forklifts idled. Voices caught in throats. Even the sea beyond the hull seemed to hush for a moment. She lifted her head slowly, her cap shadow slipping just enough to reveal her eyes. They were steady, unflinching, the kind of eyes that had seen storms far greater than this one. She didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch until the air itself grew taut. The Admiral waited, his jaw set, his posture rigid. The sailors looked from one to the other, confusion written across their young faces. They hadn't seen the metal for what it was, hadn't understood the significance. But now they knew one thing. Whatever that piece of bronze meant, it mattered enough to stop the Admiral in his tracks. Her fingers brushed the edge of the bag, a small, almost unconscious motion, as if acknowledging the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, steady, almost too quiet to carry above the hum of the carrier. "It's mine." The words landed heavier than a shout, heavier than laughter. They silenced the deck not by force, but by truth. And for the first time the Admiral's gaze softened, not into gentleness but into recognition. The Admiral's eyes had not left hers, and in that gaze there was no rank, no separation, only the pull of memory. The deck around them had grown unnaturally quiet. Sailors who only moments ago were shifting crates and shouting orders now stood rooted in place, their curiosity bending toward the woman with the bag and the faint glimmer of bronze. She shifted slightly in her seat, fingers curling against the fabric as though weighing whether the truth should finally step into the light. For decades she had carried silence like a shield, and breaking it now felt like tearing open a wound that had never closed. When she began to speak, her voice was low, almost fragile, yet every word seemed to echo across the steel hull. She told them about a mission the newspapers had buried long ago, a line of print swallowed by bigger headlines, reduced to a footnote in history. The world was told it had failed, that there were no survivors, that the names of those who went in had been written in stone before the dust had even settled. She was not supposed to exist. The silence had been deliberate. Her words painted the night of insertion, the roar of rotors swallowed by dark, the weight of equipment pressed against her body, the surge of adrenaline that dulled into a steady hum of focus. The objective had been simple on paper: extract a group of hostages from deep inside enemy territory. But the paper had never captured the ground, the shifting loyalties, the trap that had been waiting all along. The ambush came swift and merciless. Fire lit the trees, radios fell into static, and one by one the voices she depended on were silenced until only her own breathing remained. She told them how she pressed forward anyway, crawling through mud and blood, driven not by orders, but by something harder to name. She carried the coordinates they had risked everything for, scrawled in code, hidden in the lining of her boot. When the extraction team never arrived, she became her own exit. Captured before she could reach the border, she spent 14 months in a camp whose existence no map dared record. She survived not by strength alone, but by stubborn refusal, holding tight to the knowledge she still had something to deliver, something the war needed more than it needed her. When she was finally traded back, she was not welcomed as a soldier returned, but ushered quietly into a closed room where officials with heavy eyes told her that the mission had never happened. For the sake of politics, for the sake of fragile alliances, every name had been struck from the record. She was handed a medal in a ceremony witnessed by 4 men who never spoke her name aloud again. Then she was told to go home, to live quietly, to forget. Forgetting had never been possible. Her voice wavered only once, when she spoke of the faces of her unit, names she still carried, though no one else would. The medal, tarnished and hidden, was not a badge of pride but a headstone she could take with her. Every stitch of its ribbon was soaked with memory, and to her it weighed more than any crate she carried on this ship. The Admiral listened without interruption, his shoulders heavy with the gravity of her words. Around them the young sailors stood silent, their smirks and whispers long gone. What they heard was not legend, not myth, but the living pulse of history that had been buried under silence. She spoke until the words ran dry, and when she stopped, the quiet that followed was not absence but reverence. The story she had carried alone was no longer hers alone. The Admiral sat with her long after the words had finished spilling into the charged silence of the deck. His posture was stiff, his hands folded behind his back, but his eyes carried something unspoken, an understanding that crossed the line between command and kinship. He did not interrupt, did not fill the space with platitudes. He simply listened, giving her the one thing she had been denied for decades, the dignity of being heard. When her voice faltered into stillness, he stood, drawing himself to full height. Without hesitation, he saluted her, not as a superior to a subordinate, but as a soldier to another whose scars were carved deeper than any parade ground could show. The gesture rippled through the deck like a current. The younger sailors, unsure, glanced at one another. Saluting her felt unthinkable. She was, to their eyes, just another deckhand, a woman who carried crates and kept her head down. But the Admiral's unwavering arm cut through doubt. Slowly, almost awkwardly, one of the recruits lifted his hand to his brow, then another, until the entire line of them mirrored the gesture. Their faces no longer wore smirks but solemn recognition, a quiet shame lingering in their expressions. For the first time, she was not invisible. By the following day, whispers had spread across the carrier like wildfire carried on salt air. Stories traveled through narrow corridors and down ladders, muttered in the mess, repeated in the barracks. "Did you hear about her?" someone would ask. The woman with the medal. The tale warped in detail but never in essence. What mattered was not the precision of the facts but the weight of her presence. Those who had mocked her now found themselves stepping aside when she passed, their voices lowered in a respect they had never thought to give. The Admiral gave quiet orders that no one questioned. A photograph was retrieved, grainy but recognizable, of her younger self in fatigues, her hair tied back, eyes fierce beneath the shadow of a helmet. It was mounted on the wall of the mess hall, framed in simple black. Beneath it, a plaque bore words carved not by bureaucracy but by truth. Elise Rowan, Operation Silent Raptor. Service without recognition. Valor beyond record. Around her name were etched, the others the ones listed as lost, the ones who had never come home. For the first time she saw their memory acknowledged, even if the world outside the steel hull never would. When she entered the mess hall that evening, conversation stopped. The clatter of trays and utensils faded into silence. Dozens of sailors rose to their feet instinctively. No words were spoken, none were needed. They simply stood, a wall of quiet respect. At the center, the young recruit who had once sneered at her bag stepped forward, his hands trembling as he held out a folded flag and a small bouquet of fresh flowers scrounged from the Admiral's quarters. His voice broke as he whispered, "We didn't know. We're sorry." Her eyes lingered on the framed photograph, on the names etched in metal beside it. She did not cry, though her chest ached with a weight she had carried alone for too long. Instead, she allowed a small, quiet smile to surface. It was not triumph, not vindication. It was relief. Some heroes shine in ceremony, others carry their stories folded deep in shadows. She had been one of the latter, meant to fade into silence. But on that carrier, in that moment, she was seen, and that was enough.